what I've essentially got on my machine here is I've got the NetSupport Manager control component installed. I'm also running the NetSupport Manager gateway on this machine just for ease of showing that to you. And then I've got a virtual machine which is running a NetSupport Manager client. Now, if I was an end user, just to show you the experience of connecting to that client machine, what I'm going to do, I'm going to run my NetSupport Manager control. So I'm going to start up my control program here, and you'll see on the left hand side we've got a internet gateways section. You can expand that and have multiple gateways visible there, or you'll see the different icons for those here. We'll walk you through a bit later on how you add this gateway icon. Once you have got this gateway added to your control, you're then simply just going to double click on the gateway icon and then select to perform a browse of the gateway. And that will then return a list of any clients that match your key and that are currently connected to that gateway server. So as you can see in my example here, I've just got one virtual machine connected to my gateway server. Now that that has appeared within the control, I can now right click and perform a connection to that client. And once you've got the active connection to that machine, that's when you can begin to use the remote control features from within the control. So you've now got access to the remote command prompt, inventory, chat, but primarily you're probably going to be using this for the view option. So we've got the ability to start a view session there. So you can click view at this point. Alternatively, you can double click on the client and that will jump you straight into the remote control session. Once you're in the remote control session, there are different things that you can do in here. So again, common tasks you're going to be performing is remote controlling the device. So we are on share permissions at the moment, which essentially means I've got access to the remote machine's keyboard and mouse. And I can change that around to control mode or watch mode as I need to. I can also increase or decrease the color depth. So again, if this is maybe remote controlling over a slower connection, I could lower the color depth, which then limits the amount of data being sent across that connection, which helps improve the performance. And that's something that's sometimes quite key when you are working remotely. Now, another kind of general task you might be performing day to day is file transfer. So once you've got the view session open, you can also do it outside of the view session. You can then access the file transfer option from the toolbar here, and you'll see at the top a list of your folder structure and then a list of the client's folder structure. And you can essentially go to your files or folder, and it's simple drag and drop to the other folder on the bottom half to then copy the files to that client. And you can do that vice versa. So I can move the files from the client machine to my control machine. So that's a little bit about the remote connection to the client and the functionality that becomes available. Probably most of you have seen that if you're used to using the NetSupport Manager products for remote control, if you're used to using the tech console in school or the control for local connections, it's very similar across the gateway. Now, in terms of the actual setup, if we move away from the control, so I'm going to minimize the control, I'm going to look at how would you configure the gateway. So first of all, you need to find a machine that you're going to install the gateway component onto. And that could be a virtual machine running in Azure, or a virtual machine running or hosted in AWS, or it might be you've got your own server in the office that you want to put the gateway component on. And you can put that in different areas. Now, the key thing to do with the gateway is it needs to be visible to your clients and controls. So if you're going to have clients offsite or controls offsite, then you need to make sure that they can connect to that gateway server. So you may require a port forwarding rule. By default, the port for that is 443, but you can change that to be specific to your requirements. So once you've got that set up and installed, essentially you'll end up with a gateway icon in the system tray, which is the little globe icon down there. And you can double click on this. And first of all, it will tell you what machines you have connected. So you can look at the client tab here, and I can see I've just got my one virtual machine connected at this time. But if I had multiple machines, it wouldn't necessarily matter where they are. They might be on the same site as a gateway. They might be completely off-site. As long as they can see that gateway, they will connect and be listed on here. You can also view any active sessions. So if you want to see who is using and connecting to machines at that time across the gateway, they will be reported in the active sessions tab just here. So they're the two main tabs you're going to be using. Now, in terms of configuring the gateway, when you first install the gateway component, it will pop up with this prompt just here, which is the NetSupport connectivity server configuration utility. Now, just a couple of things we really need to cover at this point. So if you're setting this up for the first time, your port will be listed as 443. I tend to change it to 3085, but that's just in case things like maybe IES might already be installed, that might already be for free on your server. So we tend to kind of change this to 3085. But again, you can change that to whatever is required for your purposes. Okay. You then need to configure a key. So if you want all your clients to be connected to the gateway, they'll only be permitted to connect if you've added a gateway key. So what you need to do is click the add button, essentially give it a description, and then type in a password between 8 and 15 characters that will be used as the key. And we'll see how that's used on the client and the control side a bit later. Now, if you're looking at restricted access, say maybe you've got a group of laptops that you want connected and then a group of servers connected, then you might want to go down the route of adding a separate key for your laptops and for your servers. And then essentially you just put the right key on the laptop and the other key on the servers. They'll all connect with those. And then for your control users, if you just want people to access the laptops, you just give them the gateway key for the laptops. And if you just want the people to access the servers, then you just give them the gateway key for the servers. When they browse the gateway, rather than seeing all of the clients currently connected to the gateway, they will only see the ones that relate to the key that they have. Now, you can also go one step further with the security of the gateway. So if you want to limit which controls can browse the gateway, you can also put operator accounts. So again, if you're passing out the gateway key to your control users, but then maybe a member of staff leaves, they would still know that gateway key. So what you can do, you could create operator accounts on your gateway. So you can tick the option restrict remote control access to these specified operators. And then you would provide a separate operator name and password to each user. And then if a user was to leave, you just remove their operator account from the gateway, and then they will no longer be able to browse that gateway server. So you haven't got to worry about changing the gateway key if you're performing that. So that's one of the other items to be aware of for the actual gateway configuration. So generally, once you've set up your port and you've set up your key, though, you're then ready to point client machines to your gateway server. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to minimize the gateway configuration, and I'm going to jump on my virtual machine here. And this is my client that I'm using that's currently connected to that gateway server. So to point your client to it, you need to use the configurator. So if it's your first client machine you're installing, what you want to do is install the NetSupport Manager client and configurator component. And on the start menu, under the NetSupport Manager group, you will find the Manager configurator. There are two options for this, basic and advanced. I tend to always use the advanced mode so you see all of the options. So if we click on advanced, you'll then be presented with the default master profile. You can double click this master profile. And the first thing you need to do is look at, how do I tell this client to point to the gateway server? So this is actually done under the HTTP section. And you need to tick the use HTTP. You then need to supply either the public IP address of the gateway server or the DNS name for the gateway server. Because mine's all local at the moment, mine is using the machine name of my gateway server because my client can resolve that to the IP address. So essentially, that needs to be the address or DNS name that is going to be visible to where your clients are located. Then need to specify your port number. So again, you need to ensure that that matches what you configured on the gateway server. So I'm using 3085 there. And then we need to configure the key. So you'd need to click the set button and type in the key that matches the plain text key that you entered on the gateway server. If they don't match, the gateway will reject the client from connecting. So it'll only permit clients to connect if they've got a valid gateway key. Now, that would be enough to get your client to report and connect to the gateway, but I don't recommend to leave it there. There is additional security options available within NetSupport Manager that I highly recommend to put in place to protect your remote client machines. And there are a few different options for this. So I'm going to step through each of these. The first one is user validation. So you'll see previously when I started my control and browse the gateway, I could just direct connect and jump onto my client machine. And that's great, but I could put some additional security on there. So I could either type in a specific username and password, and when I then attempted to connect to this machine from a control, it would prompt me for this username and password. And if I don't specify the correct one, it would not allow me to connect to that client. So I might be able to browse the gateway and see it, but I'd not be able to remote control that machine. So that can either be a local username and password that you've configured within the NetSupport Manager configuration. Alternatively, you can tick the authenticate users and password with NT, and you can then browse a NT group, so one of your local groups or domain groups. So maybe your administrators group, or maybe you've created a domain remote control group and added specific users to that. And then if I've selected that group and placed that in there, when I go to connect, it will again prompt me for a username and password. If the details I supply aren't for a user that's a member of that NT group, again, it will reject my connection. If I am a member, it will allow me to connect. And then you can also do the same, but you can do that with Active Directory groups as well. So you can browse your Active Directory for your groups of users and select which ones you want to allow access to this machine. And that's quite good if you've got that on your servers to have that security listed on there. Now, if it's remote users you're connecting to, so maybe you're providing remote support to a client that's going to be installed on a laptop, then if that person on the laptop is going to be doing things maybe that's got sensitive information, maybe the payroll or HR information, then what you can do is you can turn on the user acknowledgement feature so that when you go to remote onto that machine, it will first of all prompt that end user, do they want to allow you to connect at that time? So you can put a user acknowledgement feature on there, and there are additional options that go with that as well. So you can say if the user's not logged on, not to prompt for user acknowledgement, and you can also put a connection timeout on there so that if, for example, they haven't acknowledged it, you can either tell it to, after so many seconds, to automatically reject or accept the connection. So there's a few different options available. Again, that gives the end user a chance to maybe close things that they don't want you to see before you start the remote connection. You can also put another security key on. So this is different to the gateway key. The gateway key is to allow the client to talk to the gateway. You can also put a security key on your clients. So if your control machines aren't configured with the same security key, then they will again be rejected from connecting. So it's kind of another level of security. Now, a control user does not need to type that in every time. It is something that is stored in the control configuration, and it's a behind the scenes handshake when the control attempts to connect to the client. So again, it's something that I tend to put on by default on all my client machines. And you can either set your own security key and type in a value there. Alternatively, if you put a star in there, it will use the serial number of your license. Again, that's another way of ensuring that only controls that are licensed to your company are connecting to your client machines, because they would also be set to use the same. Now, by default, the HTTP connections to the clients are using 56-bit DES encryption. You can increase that, so there are 4 different modes available in there. So you've got the 64-bit, the 128, and the 256. The only thing to note is the higher the level of encryption, it will have an effect on the remote control performance, because obviously it just takes a bit longer to encrypt the information and send it over. Over decent connection speeds, you don't tend to see that impact it too much, but maybe across slower connections, you might see an effect there. Okay. There are other security options available, such as enabling login on the clients. So you can turn on login so that everything that is performed during the remote control is logged to a file as well. So if you want to keep a record as to what controls are connecting, you can turn that on and off within the client too. And then finally, one of the last options I tend to say to put on is the customizable text. So that, for example, if you're connecting to an end user, so they know that you're connected and you can report on who's connected. I've got a variable listed in here, which is the %s, and that relates to my control name. So in my control, I've configured the name of Andy E. So that means that when I connect and view this machine, a pop-up will appear saying Andy E is connected to you. And if I then open a view window, it'll change the message to say Andy E is viewing you. So the end user has information as to who is connected to my machine and who is performing that remote session. It's also a nice indicator as well, because when I then close the remote, they'll see that message disappear, so they know that I'm no longer connected to them. So again, just a nice indicator that someone is working on their machine. Okay, so that's the actual configuration. Once you've changed all your configuration, you put your security in place, you then need to click the Save button, and it will then prompt you to restart the Client 32 service. Alternatively, you can manually restart that using the option just there. Now that writes all that configuration to a file on the client's machine. So I tend to say set up one client, and then if you've got maybe another 10 machines or more that you need to then install with the client, obviously you don't want to have to apply that same configuration each time. Now that configuration can be applied via GPO, but also if these are going to be machines in the field, what you can do is you can set up a pre-install. So I've got a folder here that contains all the files that you would need to do a client installation. So there's 4 files you would need. You would need the NetSupport Manager installer file, and we have either the main setup.exe file there, or we also have a client-only installer you can use, which is smaller than this file. You then need the license file. So the nsm.lic file contains the license information. So if you didn't have that and you were to install, it would install it as an evaluation, which you wouldn't want to happen, because after 30 days it would then expire. So you just need to ensure you put your full license file with the setup.exe. You then need the nsm.ini file, and this tells the installer what components to install. So if you are using the full installer, you can see I've got selected there the client, but I haven't installed the configurator and control and gateway, so I'm not installing the other components. And then finally, you've got your client configuration file, the client32u.ini. This contains all the details, so all those settings you turned on for the security, all the information to connect to the gateway server is all stored within this client32u.ini file. Now, to locate these files, the best thing to do is, as I say, install a default client, configure it, apply the license, and then what you'll find is on that machine, you go to the C drive, and under program files x86, and under NetSupport, you'll find a NetSupport Manager folder, and in here you will find your client32u.ini file, which contains the configuration. You'll find a default copy of the nsm.ini file. So there's the installer information, and then you'll find your license file in there. So you can copy the 3 files out of this directory, those in the folder. Once you've got the client files there, you can then install that on your machines that you then want to remote control. So once we've got your client machines all set up and configured, you can then go to your control, and it would then be a case of starting the control. And now to add the gateway to the control, you can select the internet gateway component here. In fact, let me stop the control and go back in. So we go to our control. You've got the add gateway option just there. You would double click this, and if I had another office where I wanted to include the site for this, so I could say maybe I've got the London office. I could provide a description if I wanted to. Click on next. I could then enter an IP address for this. I could then enter my port number required. So again, I could leave this as a default 443. Click next, and then you would need to specify your key. So you could type in your key, which would be the one that you created on the gateway, and then click on OK. And that's the key, and you'll see it's encrypted there. And then you can specify your operator name and password if one was issued to you and configured on the gateway. This is where that would need to be added. I'll just type in a password there. And then you would click on finish, and that then populates the control side with the gateway server. That would then be ready for you to browse and see any clients connected to that. So that kind of steps through, hopefully, how you can use the NetSupport Manager gateway for remote support, to connect to your servers, to connect to your remote workers, or if you're working from home, to connect to your client machine in an office environment. So this is a tool that will allow you to perform that. As I say, you can have multiple gateways added to your control, and you can have lots of different security options configured on the clients. If there are any specific questions, feel free to contact NetSupport. You can access our support team on an online chat system. You can email support@netsupportsoftware.com, or if you're in contact with your account managers concerning this, again, you can always ask them questions, and I'm sure they'll be happy to send those over to us. There are some additional guides available online as well. So if you go to a browser and go to support.netsupportsoftware.com, if you access the knowledge base area, you'll find on the knowledge base area, we've got some technical documents, and under NetSupport Manager, you'll find we have configuring the NetSupport Connectivity Server Gateway. That's a complete overview showing all the steps we've gone through today, but it also gives you examples as to where you can place that gateway server and the configuration required for that. And then we've also produced a document on how you can host the gateway server using AWS, and how to host the gateway server in Azure. So there are different ways of applying that. So you can access these white papers from that list.